Welcome to another episode of On This Day on the Grueling Truth Sports Network. I'm your host for On This Day, Mike Goodpaster, and today we are looking at On This Day, January the 8th, 1989, the day the Cincinnati Bengals beat the Buffalo Bills to go to Super Bowl 23. Now, in 1986, the Cincinnati Bengals had went 10-6 and had just barely missed the playoffs in a three-way tie with the Jets and the Chiefs. In 1987, a lot of people, I think even including Sports Illustrated, picked the Bengals to possibly go to the Super Bowl. Now, 1987, the Bengals started off with a 23-21 win in Indianapolis. Then they lost a heartbreaker to San Francisco, 26-20, in a game where the Bengals failed to run the timeout. And then Jerry Rice, Joe Montana beat them on a Hail Mary pass. The strike comes, and Sam Weish and Boomer Esiason openly feuded. The team finished a miserable 4-11, and a lot of people thought that Paul Brown was going to fire Sam Weish. He didn't. He actually told Sam Weish that he needed to quit spending so much time getting the team ready at night, and he made a rule where Sam would have to be home by 8 or 9 o'clock with his family every night, and he basically thought that he was burning himself out. Now, Cincinnati had a number of offensive weapons this season, and that included 6 Pro Bowl selections. Wide receiver Eddie Brown was the top receiver on the team, 54 catches, 1,200 yards, 9 touchdowns, set franchise records for most receiving yards in a season, highest yards per catch average in a season at 24, and most receiving yards in a single game, 216 against the Steelers when the Bengals beat the Steelers 42-7. A lot of people forget, if you watched the Super Bowl 23 pregame show, that a lot of people, there was a discussion who was better, Eddie Brown or Jerry Rice at this point in their careers, because Eddie Brown was that good. Wide receiver Tim McGee and Pro Bowl tight end Rodney Holman also were major threats for the Bengals. And then, of course, you had Ickey Woods with the shuffle, the top rusher at 1,066 yards, 15 touchdowns. And you also had James Brooks, who was a key contributor, who combined for 1,200 yards, 14 touchdowns, and you had Stanley Wilson. The Bengals' offensive line was led by the best right guard in the game, Max Montoya, and the best left tackle, probably in NFL history, Anthony Munoz, who was named that year the NFL Offensive Player or Offensive Lineman of the Year for the third time in his career. The Bengals' defense, they had a superb defensive line anchored by nose tackle Tim Crumry, defensive end Jim Scow, David Grant, who was a Crumry backup, Jason Buck. They had Pro Bowl defensive backs and Eric Thomas and David Fulcher on the SWAT team, which also included Solomon Wilcott, Ricky Dixon. And this Bengals team, nothing was expected from them. In the first game of the year, they played the Phoenix Cardinals at Riverfront Stadium, and they beat the Cardinals 21-14 on 2 goal line stands, which when you talk to former Bengals players, which I have a lot on our NFL Legends show, they always point back to the goal line stand at the end of that game. Game 2, they played the Philadelphia Eagles, who were one of the favorites to go to the playoffs, led by Randall Cunningham, with, of course, Buddy Ryan as the head coach. And the Bengals came out and basically controlled that game, won it 28-24 at the end, started the season off 6-0. They lose their first game to Doug Flutie and the New England Patriots, which dropped them to 6-1. Now, as the season went on, it became obvious the Bengals were one of the best teams in the NFL. They destroyed the Steelers 42-7, and that was the first season sweep in a while for the Bengals. But what people don't realize, 88, 89, and 90, the Bengals won all 6 games against the Steelers. In Week 14, the Bengals beat the Bills 35-21, and that handed Buffalo only their second loss of the season. The Bills had come in 11-1, and that was a huge game at getting the Bengals home field advantage at the Jungle later on. And in the season's final week, on a Saturday, the Bengals beat the defending world champion Washington Redskins 20-17 in overtime. Chip Low-Miller missed a chip shot field goal. Jim Breach kicks a field goal. And I think what people forget about that was the next day, the only way the Bengals could get home field all the way through would be if the Indianapolis Colts upset the Buffalo Bills. And they did at the Hoosier Dome in Indianapolis, which dropped the Bills to the 2 seed and made the Bengals the number 1 seed. The Bengals had a week off, and then they played the Seattle Seahawks. The Seattle Seahawks lost to the Bengals. The Bengals jumped out to a big lead and ended up winning the game by 8 points. And something happened there. The Bengals had the no-huddle offense. And you had Joe Nash, who was a defensive lineman for Seattle, who was basically going down and acting like he was injured to slow down the Bengals' no-huddle offense. Now, this reared its ugly head again before the AFC Championship game between the Bengals and the Bills. Buffalo head coach Marv Levy made it apparent that he had a problem with the Bengals' offense. And he said, when you break the huddle, and I know he's not huddling, so maybe it's hazy, they are not to come out with 12, 13 players on the field. Now, Levy thought the Bengals were skirting the rules. There was talk that a Bills player would go down injured after every play to slow the game down so that the Bengals couldn't run the beloved no-huddle offense. Now, as Levy continued to draw attention to the situation, tensions grew. The day before the game, the New York Times interviewed Tony Viteri, then an assistant supervisor of officials. Viteri told them the Bengals weren't breaking any rules. When there's no huddle, it's okay to have 11 or more players on the field as long as they're off before the ball is snapped or before the clock runs down. Viteri would also add, we would never interfere with this game as far as a new interpretation of the rules. Viteri's words would prove to be anything but prophetic. 2 hours before the AFC Championship was set to kick off, the league office called the Bengals and told them that they were to use the no-huddle, they would be hit with a 15-yard flag every time it happened. The Bengals didn't use it. The Bengals won anyway, 21-10. And Weich told Sports Illustrated after the game, the heck with them, we played by their rules and we still beat them. Now, Levy would eventually take the no-huddle offense that he so hated and turn it into the eventual Jim Kelly K-Gun offense that would take the Buffalo Bills to 4 straight Super Bowls. And the big culprit here, I think, was Don Shula. Don Shula was one of the heads of the competition committee, and he had been since the early 70s, which it makes you wonder why a head coach on a football team would be a part of the competition committee, especially the big dog in it. And the Bengals didn't run the no-huddle in Super Bowl 23 either. Don Shula was a huge culprit in this by keeping them from doing it. And the sad thing is, Sam Weich just recently passed away, and people forget how innovative the 1988 Bengals were. Even though they lost the Super Bowl, everything from the zone blitz that Dick LeBeau perfected in Cincinnati, to the no-huddle offense Sam Weich ran, to zone blocking with Jim McNally, the great former Bengals offensive line coach, all that came from this team. So it's why they were on the missing rings, one of the 5 greatest teams to not win the Super Bowl. The team was that good. And it's just a shame that once you get to the playoffs, the NFL decided that they were going to insert themselves to try to slow down this team. Because when you look at it, it caused, and I mean, I've talked to Coach Weich about a year ago, talked to Coach McNally. It had a definite impact on this team. It was a distraction, especially going into the AFC Championship game. It makes you wonder what would have happened if they would have been allowed to play the game the way they played it all season. But that's our story for On This Day, January the 8th, 1989, the day the Cincinnati Bengals won the AFC Championship. You can hear On This Day every day at the Grueling Truth Sports Network. You can follow us at Grueling Truth on Twitter. You can hear all of our shows on iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you find podcasts, you'll find the Grueling Truth. But for now, I'm Mike Goodpastor, and you've been listening to the Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.